Hello everyone, my name is Miss Ashley from Fibo Kids Art Academy and welcome to another amazing art class. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make your water-based Crayola markers into alcohol-based markers like Copic or Touch markers. After we change our markers, we're going to be testing them out and drawing some mushrooms. For a list of supplies, be sure to check the description of this video. Let's go ahead and get started. So we'll be drawing these mushrooms later, but I'm just going to go ahead and put my picture to the side. And as you can see, these are the three things that we're going to be needing. These are my regular touch markers. They're very similar to Copic markers. They're alcohol-based. These markers work really well in blending and just creating that nice smooth surface with those colors. Crayola markers, however, they're water-based and you still get those streaks. It doesn't look as refined or finished, not very professional. However, sometimes those Copic markers can get a little bit pricey, whereas Crayola, they are very inexpensive. But you can change your Crayola markers into being alcohol-based markers, just like Copic markers or touch markers. So I'm going to be teaching you how to change those Crayola markers into alcohol-based markers like Copics. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is you're actually going to want to get a jar or some sort of container. And the first thing you're going to do is you're just going to take all of your markers. I have these two right here for our Fibo colors. What I do is I take that cap, put it on the back, and I just keep it in that jar for now. Because what you actually need to do is let your markers dry overnight. So however many markers that you want to dry overnight, I just put that cap on the back and put them all in a jar. You can also keep it on a flat surface, but it's nice to keep them organized in a jar. Now make sure that you do let them dry overnight. It will be less messy if you do so. Luckily, I managed to dry these overnight, so these markers are actually ready to have alcohol put into them. So I'm just going to go ahead and take these markers out. Now, if you do need to dry your markers overnight, you can always pause the video and come back to this and come back to this video the next day. I'm just going to go ahead and put that jar to the side, and I'm going to show you how to make those alcohol-based markers. Again, Crayola markers are water-based, so they don't color as smoothly. Now, when you're doing this with all of your sets, you want to make sure that you start with your lighter color first and then your darker colors. Also, this can get really messy, so if you do need a little bit of extra help, either from a parent or guardian, I highly suggest it because you are also going to be getting some pliers. Now, I like to use these pliers because they are a little bit thinner. If they're a bit bigger, it can tear the top. And this is the part where it can get a little bit intimidating, but as long as you're super careful removing that top right there, you should be okay. You want to take your pliers and you want to take it to the side. Now you don't want to pull too hard because you don't want to rip any of the top right there, or you won't be able to use that marker. So what I do is I take my pliers and I gently twist the marker, very, very gently. So then this part should come off. Now some of it did rip off at the bottom, and that's okay. Just as long as we have this main top right here, that's all that matters. So I'm just going to put that right here, and I'll repeat that step. Sometimes I like to take a paper towel or just paper and clean off those pliers. I'll show you again. Then you take your marker in hand, take those pliers, squeeze not too hard, and then you're going to want to twist your marker very carefully, because again, you don't want to rip off just the top. All right, and I'm just going to clean off those pliers. You can even go wash them if you wanted to. Now I have this lid right here just to make sure to keep everything nice and even. You can also excuse me, put paper towels on just to make sure that that area is a little bit cleaner, but I do guarantee that this can get a little bit messy. So you should still see some of your color inside. What you're going to do is you're going to take some alcohol. Now I have 91% alcohol right here. I find that the higher the percentage, the better it will work. And also you can get an eyedropper to insert that alcohol. But since I have a small cap right here, I'm just going to eyeball it. But sometimes it is a little bit easier if you do use an eyedropper of sorts. And you're wanting to put some alcohol inside of your marker. Now make sure that you do put quite a bit in there, but make sure you don't fill all the way to the top. You do want to fill, oops, so I dripped a little bit too much right there. No worries, I can also just empty a little bit by tapping. Maybe I'll get just a little bit extra. This is where the eyedrop method can really come in handy. But once you do fill it up with alcohol, if you do need to take out just a little bit, that's okay. Okay, you don't want it too overflowing, but you do want to make sure that you pretty much just fill up the entire marker. Then you do take the top of that marker that we pulled out, and you're just going to push it right back into place. Now you may need to twist because those on the side, they do have some divots, engravings almost, to kind of just slide that marker in. So if you need to twist it back in, I recommend doing so. Now again, you can see that it's getting pretty messy. So I have a paper towel right here to clean my hands, and if you need to press it with your finger, you can also do that. And then it should be back in place. And then I like to close it and shake it just a little bit, just to make sure that the alcohol gets all over the inside ink cartridge. And then you can also clean up those markers. So as you can see, it got a little bit messy right here. I'm just gonna leave that marker right there. Some ink may leak out of it just because of all the alcohol, and that's okay, you can just clean it right off. So let's go ahead and do that step again with our blue. Again, I'm gonna take some alcohol, and I'm just going to pour it right into the cartridge. Again, you can do this with an eyedropper. It's a little bit neater. So when you add the alcohol, your marker should feel just a little bit heavier. And I'm going to take my pliers, and I'm just going to put that top right back into its case. And then close that marker and shake it just to get that alcohol all around. All right. Also, as you are doing this with all of your markers, I recommend cleaning those pliers, also working on the lighter colors first and then the darker ones, because those sides can get a little bit dirty. It won't affect the marker too much, but if you just want them to look neater, make sure you do clean your pliers. Now that we have our alcohol-based markers ready, I'm just going to show you the difference between my regular Crayolas without alcohol and my markers with alcohol. Now sometimes they can drip a little bit. This is where it comes in handy to test those markers out before committing to your project. But these right here, you can tell they're a little bit faded. These are ones that do not have alcohol in them. And as you color with them, sometimes they get those annoying streaks, and they tend to get darker and darker the more ink you put on it. And sometimes they also just get pretty dry. So there's my blue, and there's my orange. So it's not a bad color per se. I just find that it's hard to blend with them for sure. So if I wanted to blend that blue and orange, which they're complementary colors, it'll turn it brown in the middle. They don't blend as well. However, with alcohol-based markers, you might see that they can explode if there's too much alcohol in there, which is why I like to test on paper. You get this nice, smooth color going on. Now again, it can take a little bit of time for that alcohol to settle in, which is why I like to prep the marker first, make sure to color with it, see if it needs more alcohol. Again, you can always take that eyedropper and add more alcohol into it. As you can see, no matter how many times I'm going over that orange, it's staying the same color. And we'll test out the blue next. There's my blue, like to open on the side. You can see it dripped just a little bit. I might need to just color the sides and spread that blue. So you can see right here, compared to those two, this became a little bit darker, and that blue is really starting to blend. So it looks like my orange right here may need a little bit more alcohol. My blue seems to be okay though. So go ahead and take that moment to fill up the rest of your markers. Can take a while depending on how many markers that you filled up. I filled up all of these markers right here. So I'm just gonna make sure to test them out, make sure that they don't all drip before I commit to coloring my picture. Because again, it can drip and you don't wanna ruin your picture. So take this moment to pause your video, take those pliers and alcohol, make sure to take out the top of that marker and then put the alcohol in and then fill it back in. And keep doing that, and then I will see you all very shortly for our project because we're going to go ahead and test out those Crayola markers. All right, so hopefully all of your markers are filled up with alcohol and you've tested them out to make sure that they're not dripping too much. Unfortunately, the downside to doing this method of creating these alcohol-based markers out of Crayola is that they can still continue to drip, which is one reason why I recommend letting them dry overnight. So that way all the water evaporates out of it. But we're gonna go ahead and get started with drawing our mushrooms. I want you to make sure that you're using a pencil for this drawing. I'm going to be using a Sharpie so you can see my lines. But please make sure that you are using a pencil. We'll draw our first mushroom, and if you want to draw more of these mushrooms closer together or a little bit bigger, that is up to you. But I'm just going to go ahead and draw this curve. And connect. As a little side note for my drawing, I'm making sure that it's actually a little bit smaller. One thing about Copics is that you do want to make sure that you're only coloring smaller areas. You don't want to use a whole big paper or any sort of alcohol-based marker. I'm going to bring this curve down and down, and then I'm going to connect. All right, so there's my first mushroom. My second mushroom, I'm just going to draw a rainbow. And then I'm going to curve. Bring two slightly curved lines down. And connect. All right, I'm going to draw another rainbow here that's slightly slanted. And curve. And then curve, curve, and connect. Again, you can make this one a little bit longer if you want, or even shorter. That's totally up to you because these are your mushrooms. For this one though, I'm actually going to go backwards by bringing a curve up and then down and over. Then I'm going to start behind the stem, curve up and down and back here. Because I do want to see the underside of that mushroom by drawing another curve. Awesome, great job on your mushrooms. We've got one more to draw, which this time I'm going to draw kind of what looks like a stretched out letter S. And do that again. Connect at the bottom. And then the top. Because with just like this mushroom, I want to see the underside of it. So I'm going to draw an oval around part of that stem. And then curve up and slightly down. I'm not going to add a background quite yet. The main focus is the mushrooms because we are going to be learning how to blend with our homemade Copic markers. So if you do want to change those mushrooms in any way whatsoever, whether it's size or placement, you can go ahead and do so. But when you are done drawing your mushrooms, they should look something like this. Now, one reason why I am keeping this larger piece of paper at the bottom is, first of all, in case my markers do drip, I want it to drip on the paper first and then I'll convert it over to the mushrooms. Second of all, when you are using those alcohol-based markers, you want to make sure that there are more pieces of paper underneath, so in case that marker bleeds through, it's still staying in the same area and it's not spreading anywhere else. I find it just blends a lot better if you do have that paper underneath. Now, the nice thing about Copic markers or any alcohol-based markers, like our homemade ones right here, is that you can also use colored pencils with them. So the only thing that I'm going to do for colored pencils right now is I'm going to grab my brown. I'm going to find my darkest brown, and I am going to outline my mushrooms. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this moment to outline. All right, and I'm just following that line. Now, another thing too I didn't mention earlier is when you are drawing and going to use Copic markers over it, graphite and alcohol-based markers actually don't get along too well. It will ruin the top of your marker. So if you do use pencils and Copic markers or any alcohol-based markers together, you want to make sure to draw really lightly. But in this case, I drew darker just so you could see my drawing, but I am going over it with colored pencil. All right, so I'm just tracing over very carefully over my mushrooms. I like to use brown, but you can use any color you want. All right. All right, so I'm almost done with my mushrooms. I'm just gonna fix up that side real quickly. And then right here. All right, almost done with this mushroom. And then we'll move on to our first color. Now, fortunately for all of you, I actually did test out different Crayola markers to use when blending. Now, I did try putting alcohol in smaller skinny markers called the super tips, or I also did try using the pipsqueaks to add that alcohol. Both of them had pros and cons to them. I didn't let them dry overnight, so they were a little bit messier, which is why I really recommend that you do let those markers dry overnight before adding the alcohol. I do find, however, that the standard Crayola markers, like the ones that we have right here, work best for applying alcohol inside of that marker. But when you are using those Copic markers, you want to do some blending. Now, first things first, I'm just going to scooch my paper over here so that way I can drip onto the paper in case it does do that, and then color. So when you are coloring your mushrooms, you want to make sure to go from light to dark. So I have my yellow right here, and you can see it's getting a little bit messy, but I like to open up my marker. Might still have some alcohol in it, so you can see it kind of dripped. I like to just color around first, make sure I don't have too much alcohol in my marker. This marker right here, I'm going to go from yellow to orange to red to show that blending. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to take my yellow and I'm just going to color just the top of my mushroom. So you can see that color spreading quite a bit. I am going to leave my yellow right here because I will need to go back to it. Now I'm going to take my orange. Now I have this tiger orange right here. It's kind of a little bit messy. So I am missing my paper towel, so I'll have to go grab one in a bit. You can see it's still a little bit drippy. That's the unfortunate thing about this method, that it can get really messy, which is why you always test it on paper first, just to make sure that your alcohol is everywhere in your marker. I'm just going to go ahead and color my mushroom. All right. So I'm just going to color here, put that cap back on, take my yellow again, and blend in the middle. So it should start to blend. Now, as you can see, I have a little bit too much alcohol on this marker, and that's okay. I just need to blend it around. You can see it's starting to blend just a little bit more. And if you do have a little bit too much, you can always get that paper towel and dab. Actually kind of creates some cool textures if it has a little bit too much. But we are going for that smoothing. So if you need to take your yellow again and color. And then you can go back to your orange. Whoops. Again, make sure to just drip on the paper. I think I put a little bit too much alcohol in this one, so I'm just going to clean that side right there. And then keep blending. So you can see it's got that nice blended gradient going on, which can only be achieved with those alcohol-based markers. Now I did say I was going to do red, but I think I'm going to actually stick to brown, and I'll save this mushroom for red because this tiger orange is a little bit more on the brown side. So I'm going to grab my brown in here. I made a brown pipsqueak. I'm going to take that off. And then I'm going to color the rest of my mushroom brown, just the top, not the stem. Now these I did add alcohol as well. So once you color that, you're going to go back to that color. So my tiger orange. Again, color here and blend. If you do have a little bit too much, always take your paper towel and tap it. So you can see that it is starting to blend, but you can also see that it's gone through the paper. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the rest. You should still see that brown underneath, but I'm taking my tiger orange to blend that color. I'm actually going to go back to my brown. Just because a little bit dripped right there, but it's okay. You can always fix any little mistake. There are no mistakes in art. And make sure that that mushroom's nice and smooth underneath. And there we go. So I can go back to my tiger orange and blend some more. And I believe I added a little bit too much alcohol. I know sometimes they say less is more, but in the case of these alcohol-based markers, you do want to make sure you add enough alcohol. It can also be a problem with the top of the marker not being on securely. But again, it does work. And there we go. It will start to dry. So right now it looks a little bit shiny because of that alcohol. We'll just wait for it to dry. You can always come back to fixing up any of those lines just to blend it a little bit more. So for example, I go back to my yellow and blend right here. Now, if it is too wet, it will be a little bit harder for it to blend. So which is why I'm going to let this dry for the time being. All right. Next, I'm going to work on these mushrooms. Now, I want these to be a lighter orange with some gold. So I have some of these alcohol-based markers that I made. So I'm just going to take my pipsqueak orange right here and fill it in. Now, I myself like to fill in the entire area with the lightest color. So for this one earlier, I only filled in the top yellow and then the middle with tiger orange and the bottom with brown. But I myself prefer to fill in the entire mushroom with one color and then add the darker colors. When working with Copics, you want to make sure you go light to dark. You can also see, no matter how many layers that I added, it still stays pretty true to its color. It does get a little bit darker, but you don't get those annoying streaks that you get with the water-based markers. So there's that. Then I'm actually going to go with orange. So I'm gonna try my orange here. Again, I have all these fake Copics that I made earlier. They work, but I wanna make sure that I'm using my Crayola markers that I changed today. Again, make sure you color on the side just to make sure that it's working. I'm gonna take this, add some shading on the bottom. You can see it's starting to blend. And blend right here. Now, if it's not blending as well as you'd like, no worries. You can easily go back to your first color and blend in the middle. Blend right here. Now you can start to notice that this mushroom right here is starting to dry and those colors are nicely blending together. This one's kind of looking like a little candy corn. Alrighty, so there is that mushroom there. I can make it a little bit darker. I have a darker orange right here that I can add to the corner right here. Pros and cons to using the super tip ones. It's nice for those extra added details. So I'm going to be using it for grass later on. However, they are a little bit of a pain to fill in with alcohol. Excuse me, almost said markers. They're already markers. But again, they're nice to get those really hard to reach areas. They are just kind of a pain to fill in. All right, go back to my yellow. Scratch, I actually used orange to blend. So I'm just going over, blending some more, just to make sure. If you have too much of that, you can pat it with a paper towel. Now, Copics don't do this actually. There's enough alcohol in those markers to make sure that they don't overflow. Again, when you're doing the homemade method, you do run that risk of having that alcohol flowing out of the marker. Now, if it is not blending as well as you'd like to, maybe just wait for it to dry a little bit and then come back to it, just like with this one here. Let's go ahead and move on to the red mushroom. I'm actually going to start off with pink first on the top. I'm going to go ahead and put that orange away. And if you do need to pause the video for any reason whatsoever, you're more than welcome to do so. Now, since pink's my lighter color, I'm going to fill in my mushroom with this pink marker. Now, I did fill this one up with alcohol, but it seems like it's still a little bit streaky, so I may need to go back and add just a little bit more alcohol to it. All right. Then I'm going to take my darker color, again, test, make sure that it's working okay on here, and add that shading. Now I find if you draw straight from the tip of the marker, it tends to bleed a little bit more, or even the side too. Right now, it's not blending as well as I'd like it to because they are not close in color. So I may go back with my pink. I'm gonna go back with my pink and blend in the middle. That's the nice thing about alcohol-based markers is you can get that nice blend. Now right now it's looking a little bit too pink, so I will go back over with some red. So I'm gonna take my red marker out. Test to make sure that it's working okay. And I'm just gonna start coloring over it. Well, I did like the pink, I want it to be more red. So I'm just gonna color over with my red. Now again, if I were to do this with water-based markers, the color just makes it go darker and soon it just starts to look black or brown. Now you can see it's making a little bit of a mess, so I'm just gonna have to clean that up. But you can see that really nice blend right there. All right, let's color the stems of our mushrooms next. We're going to take out a brown or an orange And what we're going to do is we're just going to color the side right here, and this side, and we'll go for this side. I also want to add those lines like so. So again, it's nice to have the super tip ones, but again, they are a little bit harder to put that alcohol in there. I also have this peachy pink color that I can blend with to make it blend a little bit more with that yellow. You can go right on top of it, like so. All right, so now that we have our 3 mushrooms colored, you can see that nice little gradient, but you can always go back if you wanted to add a little bit more darker color. So I'll go back with my orange just to touch up on those corners right there of that mushroom. But again, always check to make sure that it's nice and even. All right, there are my mushrooms. Let's talk about the grass real quickly. The grass is a large area, so I'm only going to fill in just a little bit of that area with my green. So I'm going to take my green marker. You see that alcohol is just trying to drip right through it. So open it on the side, test it out, make sure that there's no alcohol dripping out of it. Now I'm just going to go over and start to color underneath my mushrooms where there's grass. You can see that nice even flow of color. Although I'm going back and forth and there are some darker areas, it does blend really nicely. So we'll just go ahead, take that green, getting a little bit drippy, so going to fix that. Now what if your marker's too drippy? That's okay, because you can actually just push that color to the side and cover it with a darker green. So we'll just take our time to color our grass. Now over time that more of the alcohol will come out of the marker when you color it, and so it won't be as drippy. But it just takes practice. Now, while I do enjoy filling up those markers with alcohol and testing them out, I still do like to use my COPIC markers or my touch markers. There are alternatives to cheaper alcohol-based markers that you can find on Amazon or anywhere online. But if you do like the Crayola route, you can always go for that. Again, it is just a little bit messier. All right. That's all the grass that I'm going to fill in right now. So if I'm going to lift my paper up, that's all that I filled in. You can see that some of that color leaked through the back right there, again, which is why we put that piece of paper down. I'm going to take my regular green, and I am going to make sure that it's not too drippy. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading underneath. Now you can see it's still a little drippy, probably a little bit too much alcohol. So which is why you just test it out a little bit more and go back. All right, and I'm going to go back to my yellow green and blend that. So it kind of does look a little bit like watercolors. Now here's where I really like the skinnier markers, is because I can actually add more of those grass strands. So I've got this one right here. Again, test it out on the side. Go in and you can add those lines of grass for that extra detail. So I'm just going through. It blends really nicely with the other green below it. Stays true to the color as well. So since a little bit of green did go right here, I'm just going to go over with my green here and make it look more like that it is rooted to the ground. I'm just adding some of that grass. All right. So it works really well. At first I wasn't too impressed with filling in the alcohol for the thinner ones, but now with these adding the detail with the thinner marker, I think it works really well actually. I'm just going to keep adding that grass. Works really well. You can also switch to different greens if you'd like to. So I'm actually going to switch to my darker green right here. And this one's also filled with alcohol. You can go in and add even more grass. That one's a little bit darker. It works nice with the shaded area right here. Those strands just a little bit longer. All right, so there is my grass. All right, the nice thing also about alcohol-based markers is you can use colored pencils with them, like I said earlier. I find it's best to wait for those, any part of your mark or your picture that is colored in marker to dry before adding colored pencil on top of it. But right here, I'm just gonna test out. So right now it's a little bit wet. I'm just trying to add some of those circles on it. If it is too wet, it can tear the paper. So it's very important to let that part dry so that you can add any of those little details with colored pencil. But right here, this part should be a little bit dry. And the more colors that you used on that area, the more wet it's going to be, and it's going to take longer to dry. Excuse me. But you can go here with your brown, add a little bit of shading. Alcohol-based markers are really nice for the blending. I find though that pictures look a little bit more interesting if they do have some texture, and that's what's nice about colored pencils, is that you can bring some of those textures back. Now when your picture is completely dry, you can also use chalk pastels on your picture. Again, it's best if it is dry, but I'll just show you with my chalk pastels what areas that I would color. So if you do want to add any of those extra details with colored pencils, again, make sure that your picture is dry. But I can take my green and go slightly over that Copic marker to fill in those larger areas. Copic markers or any alcohol-based markers are nice for smaller areas. But if I'm coloring a large area like this, I make sure to use something like watercolors or chalk pastels to fill in those bigger areas. Depending on the colors you use, you can be able to blend it nicely together. So now we almost can't see where the Copic marker or our alcohol-based markers start and where's the chalk pastel. All right, and for that sky, I'm just going to use a combination of light blues and tans. You could also do this with watercolor as well. I think chalk pastels and markers look really nice together. I'm just going to go around and then grab my tan. Maybe it's almost sunset. then I'll blend. So again, it's best if you wait for your picture to be completely dry before adding that chalk pastel on. And there you have your picture. And get as close as you can. Also, if your markers are dry on your picture, you can also take an eraser right over it, but make sure that it is dry. If it's still wet and you erase, it's going to tear the paper. So again, COPIC markers, alcohol-based markers like Touch or Prismacolors, they work well with all sorts of other different art mediums like chalk pastel, watercolors, colored pencils. They're a really great tool to use. So just to review real quickly what we did today for our picture and what we did earlier. We took some Crayola markers. We first made sure to dry them overnight so they weren't as wet. We also, the next day, took off the top of the marker right here with pliers, filled it with alcohol, and then put that top back on. Just as a little reminder, as you are working on pictures, make sure you do have a paper on the side to test and make sure that your markers aren't too drippy and that they are nice and clean. Again, you may need to go over and clean some of those markers up. But hopefully you enjoyed learning how to create Crayola water-based markers into alcohol-based markers. They're very nice. They make your picture look a little bit more professional. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a lot of fun learning about alcohol-based markers and how to make your own homemade alcohol-based markers with Crayola markers. And please post your pictures online. We would love to see your mushrooms. And we will see you next time. Bye.